I think the major challenge you know, is keeping in mind that this generation, we were the early adopters way back, when personal computers were just coming into the office, when, a lot of this stuff was just developing, people like you and me, or just the person at home who bought an Apple II or an IBM PC and had to actually open it up and put circuit boards in it. I mean, our generation was the early adopters, and without us, we would have never gotten where we are today.
Welcome back. My name is Neil Rarup, and I'm with the Transitions Network. Really excited to bring you an interview today with Michael Rogers. Michael Rogers is a author, futurist, and interactive media pioneer. Michael was the futurist for the New York Times and currently helps businesses and organizations worldwide think about the future. In recent years, he has worked with companies ranging from FedEx and Boeing to Microsoft and NBC Universal. His most recent novel, Emails from the Future, Notes from 2084, was published on Earth Day 2022, and I'll put that link in the description for this video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this interview. It's really interesting to talk about technology that'll help the retiree. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us. Before we start, why don't you give a bit of a rundown on who you are? I gave an intro at the beginning, but it's always good to hear from the actual person that
Mhm.
I'm talking to, so it's in their own words.
Well, I go back to my education, which was a combination of physics and creative writing. Degrees in both, because I thought I would have to support my writing through electrical engineering, which has
Hmm.
fascinated me. But turns out I could actually make some money writing. So I ended up turning to writing instead of taking a summer internship at Intel, uh, which back then, if I'd started collecting stock, we'd be doing this from my yacht.
Where, when would that have been?
That would have
And just,
been,
and I ask just for context so people understand, since this is a podcast with regards to those getting close to retirement
mhm.
or having recently retired, you're not going to bring on somebody that's 20. So
That
roughly
was that
when
was
would the,
yeah, that was the mid 70s.
okay,
So instead of going into technology, I went to Rolling Stone.
really?
And
Oh,
that
that
was
would have been cool.
it was rock and roll was very good to me, the parts I can remember.
Okay. So
And
your career, you ended up moving more into the futurist, the
mhm,
writing side of
mhm.
things.
What happened was that I began writing about technology and about 1980 or so began believing what I wrote, that technology would totally change media. So at the
Mhm.
time, I was at the Washington Post Company, and they basically said, I went to them and said, we have to start exploring this. And they said, fine, don't spend too much money, but we think it's silly, but you go ahead. So I started doing that and spent 20 years there, basically doing research and development about the future of news. First of all, on things like AOL and CompuServe, which much of your
Oh,
audience will
wow.
probably recall, and
Okay.
then transitioning over to the web. So, uh, and by the turn of the century, the Washington Post was losing some interest in the internet, I felt, and was going in a direction I didn't believe in. So I moved over to the New York Times and became
Okay.
their futurist in residence and doing R&D there. So really, I sort of found a way to put together both sides of my brain, the writing side and the
Right.
technology side. And then once I left the New York Times, I realized that I'm at my best thinking about the future. So I should just concentrate on that.
Okay. And what are you doing now? I'm assuming you're still
Mhm.
active.
Part of the time, I do public speaking and also small meetings, for example, with C-level people or boards of directors to sort of help them think about the future in useful ways.
Hmm.
And then the rest of the time, I do some consulting and some writing. Uh,
Okay.
my last novel came out my sixth novel actually came out 2 years ago, and I'm working on another one now. So
That was called Email from the Future, Notes from 2084.
exactly. Mhm.
Okay. And what were some of the things that you were seeing coming out of that?
Well, I predicted that there would, at some point in the next decade or so, be a major social shift in the sense that a majority of people on the planet would understand we had to do something about climate change.
Okay.
And then, sort of following off from that, it was really a utopian book. It essentially asked the question, if we know a lot about what could fix the planet and what could fix society right now. What if we did everything right for 50 years? So I was
Yeah.
describing that society, and it was utopian because we have way too many dystopian novels, right? It's easy to write a
Yeah.
dystopian novel. Utopias, though, have sort of stopped being popular for a while. So
Yeah.
it's a utopian novel.
So what I'll do for everybody is I'm assuming it's still available through,
Yes,
for example, Amazon.
absolutely.
So what I'll do is I'll put in the description of this video a link to the Amazon
Great.
URL where the book is available, so people that are interested can access it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
We like that.
Yeah. Um, so want to talk with regards to those that are up in our age group. Um,
Mhm.
the last 20 years or so, I've ended up being a little, let me give some context here. I myself have, for those that are listening, have also been in technology for a very long time. I started back in the mid 80s, and my degree was in robotics and automation. And I fell into IT in the late 80s. Um, so as a result, the people in this area tend to come to me when they're having problems. I have found that the people that are past retirement have always had issues with dealing with computers and computer issues, hell, even browsers, or how to not even sure what this is, which is the
Mhm.
mouse for those that couldn't see you appropriately. Um, what do you see as some of the challenges coming up for this next generation of retirees? Because a lot of them will have lived most of their adult life with some form of technology.
I think the major challenge you know, is keeping in mind that this generation, we were the early adopters way back, when personal computers were just coming into the office, when, a lot of this stuff was just developing, people like you and me, or just the person at home who bought an Apple II or an IBM PC and had to actually open it up and put circuit boards in it. I mean, our generation was the early adopters, and without us, we would have never gotten where we are today.
Mhm.
Uh, but things have gotten much more complicated, of course, and it's easy to sort of fall behind on what you know. Also, I think that when we look at new technologies these days, we get real emotional about it, uh, more emotional than we are about most tools. It's just a tool, but it can elicit in us anger, right? Why doesn't this work the way that
Oh,
it's supposed
okay.
to? Why
Okay.
doesn't this? And the other one is sort of a sense of humiliation. I can't keep up with this. I don't know how to use this.
Mm,
And so it's interesting to me that we have these emotional responses. I mean, we don't have emotional responses, say, to other tools like cheese graters, but the computer does bring this out in us. So I think it's good to sort of take a breath and recognize that these are just tools
mhm.
and that we have conquered, all of us, tools in the past. That said, technology, the devices of technology are getting more complicated to use. Uh, and the reason, in part, is because everything has become software. In the old
Yes.
days,
Mhm.
technology boxes, for hi-fi amplifier to go way back, had switches and knobs and dials. So you had a physical contact with it. And then, and that limited how complicated something could be because The engineer might in the middle of the night think of a great new feature to put in this amplifier. But in the
Mhm.
morning, the marketing guy would say, that's out of budget. No, we'd have to drill a new hole in the
Mm.
faceplate and buy the knobs. No, forget it. But today, a software engineer wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks of a new feature to put in the program, and he just writes the code and it shows up. And you have drop-down menus that have drop-down menus, and in business it's called feature creep. And
Yeah.
so that's part of what we're facing is
Yeah.
I remember a few years ago, a very complicated website, did a customer study of people who had stopped their subscriptions. Why? It's because they couldn't find what they were interested in. But
Mm.
it turned out it was there. They just couldn't find it.
U-
So,
User interface issues as
yes,
opposed to the capability of the software or the
precisely.
capability of the solution, right?
Right. Right.
Right.
So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. That
Mm.
and of course keeping up with the technology. There's,
So,
one has to
here's the
study it.
thing.
Hmm.
So here's the thing. I remember having a conversation with a fellow architect in around 2016, 2017. And we were saying that we were kind of getting bored because we were finding that the technology itself wasn't evolving the way
Hmm.
it used to be. It used to be
Right.
very quick. We went from the computing power just went faster and bigger and more capabilities, but the underlying infrastructure is now pretty stable. It's just
Mhm.
the application level. Do you see that as well, or do you see adjustments occurring now because of, for example, AI?
Well, I think that after that sort of mid 2010s
Okay.
period, the cloud became much more prevalent, not just for enterprise, but for everyone. I mean, if you had talked about it's in the cloud for most people in 2015, they would have said, which cloud is that? Cirrus?
Yeah, yeah.
But now everyone knows about the cloud, and that's where you store your things, and it's available anywhere. So I think that has been a big change.
Mm.
Probably the biggest change since 2015, except now for AI. And AI is, of course, changing all the rules and breaking up the game. Uh,
The
we don't even
concept
know
of
how much. Yeah.
the concept of a computer has changed.
Right.
This is not a phone. It's a
Yes.
computer. It's just a very small footprint.
Right. Hmm.
So it's always interesting.
And
So
now with AI, it's going to be a very, very smart computer.
do you see things adjusting to be more supportive of an older generation? And I ask that simply because the world's population is getting older. The
Yes.
demographic changes are getting older. So rather than going with a 10 font, they may go with a 14 font because our
Yes.
eyesights are changing, that sort of thing. Do you see the technology changing to adapt and support an older generation?
I think that that's definitely happening. And I sort of was underscored that when a few years ago I was asked to do a series of focus groups, lead focus groups for AARP
Okay.
and a major software company. And what they were interested in is, would baby boomers follow the path of the greatest generation, which is,
Mhm.
once, our parents got to be 75 or 80, they pretty much lost interest in new technology. I mean, you'd hear anecdotes about an 80-year-old in Florida who got up every day and traded stocks all day at his computer. But those were anecdotes, really. So the software company was concerned. Are baby boomers going to be a market again? You know? And it
Yeah.
turned out through all these focus groups that we definitely would, but we would become what I called sensible adopters. Once we were early adopters, now we're sensible adopters. We really have to see the value in something before we waste any time on it. And generally speaking, that value has to be made clear to us. So that's the
Mm.
first thing I think that we'll see technology companies begin to focus on is what do you really need and how can we provide it? The next step is, and we're already going down this path, is accessibility. If you look in the Mac operating system, the Windows, there are so many ways to reset, as you point out, fonts or the speed of the mouse going across the screen. And these
Hmm.
are aimed at anyone, with disability, but, a lot of them are perfect for older people.
Right.
So I do think that change is being made. And I think, we're going to see more and more technology that is adapted to that. Case in point, the Apple AirPods, which started out to be, yes, I see them there. Started out, of course, to be, really cool
Yeah.
and wonderfully instrumented Bluetooth earphones. And by generation two, they were beginning to talk about hearing augmentation. And by now, generation three, I mean, you can take a hearing test with the new AirPod software. It can actually adjust itself to act as a hearing aid. So, and that's just the beginning. AI is actually going to make this kind of technology, earphone technology, much, much better. So
Mhm.
that's one example of how, it simply gets engineered in. And it's interesting. I know that for years, older people hesitated to often wear hearing aids because it made
Uh,
them look older, right? Now, wearing earpods makes you look cooler. So,
yeah. It's funny because I was going to ask you about the non-internet related technologies, but that's not really an appropriate way of viewing it
mhm,
because, for example, you just talked about the AirPods. These aren't, this isn't software. It's a new technology. Um, I remember kicking myself because of a major project I had been working on that I hadn't thought about non-IT based technology. For example,
mm,
this is a screwdriver. This is a piece of
mhm,
technology.
right.
Um, this is a garage door opener. It's technology.
Mhm,
Back in the mid, around 2010 to 2015, we started adding IP addresses to non-traditional IT things, and we were calling it Internet of Things.
mhm.
So now we have all this wireless connectivity for things that you would not traditionally think of as IT. Do you see AI going down that same road where now things that you don't traditionally think of as software getting AI added into it?
Yes, I mean, give you an example that I've followed and been fascinated by for a few years now. Um,
Hmm.
and usually I start thinking about things well before they make a sensible investment. So, but I've been interested
Yeah.
in smart glasses,
Okay.
right? Glasses, we all know what glasses
Yeah.
are, but now we're, adding more features to them in the sense that they can be internet connected. I've used, there's a number of companies making them now. They're still fairly primitive compared to some of the prototypes I've seen that probably cost $50,000 to make, but which, used little sort of prisms down here to
Hmm.
project an actual computer screen that
Yeah.
looks like it's about 3 feet in front of you, if you want to see that. And, it used bone conduction to bring in sound and also to pick up your voice so you
Okay.
could talk very softly and get commands put into it. I think that, by the beginning of the next decade, a lot of people will be wearing those in the office. You may not wear them
Mm.
all the time, but they will be very handy office wear. Um, and they're going to have a lot of use, I think, for older adults because using AI, they will be able to probably augment sound, as we
Hmm.
already have, but also perhaps augment vision, letting people to zoom in on things by voice commands. Uh, and then ultimately, I'm interested in them as memory aids. Uh, because already,
Oh, yes, I can see that. Yeah.
yep. And
Yeah.
what made me start thinking about that was successful experiments, again, using these very primitive smart glasses. So I don't think it's really caught on that much, although it's still done some with autistic kids. And
Okay.
basically, the smart glasses would look at the person who was talking to the autistic kid
Hmm.
and then flash a little symbol that indicated the person was happy or the person was angry or the person
Hmm.
was sad if the patient in this case didn't had difficulty recognizing emotions.
Right.
So, and it worked quite well. Expensive and techy, and I don't know that it's widely used now, but I could see it a memory aid for people. It could just quietly pay attention to, what restaurant you're in and who's at the table with you and store that in the cloud. And then a week later, if you can't quite remember who you had lunch with, it could remind you.
Mm.
uh, Sort of a separate memory. And actually, I already use a separate memory. It's called Evernote. It's one kind of program that lets you take all kinds of notes in various forms,
Hmm.
makes it easily searchable. But,
Yeah.
um, when I find the exact kind of garbage bag that I need to buy to fit the garbage pail at home, I don't trust myself to remember that. I take a picture of it and it goes into WhatsApp, into Evernote, and I simply say trash bag, and it will tell me what trash bag I need to buy.
Yeah.
So I think this memory
Interesting.
assistance, which becomes very important after 65 or 70, is a big chance. So in other words, there's a technology, eyeglasses,
Hmm.
that will go through enormous changes within the next 20 years or so.
So you've talked with regards to the glasses. You've
Mhm.
also talked with regards to hearing aids, all of which are lead into the healthcare side of things for us that are getting older.
Mhm.
How do you see the healthcare being extended? Because right now, I would suggest healthcare is focused more of what's going on inside the doctor's offices, inside
Right.
the hospitals, that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
But one of the things we learnt with networking is at some point it went outside the physical buildings and we started
Yes.
connecting to things that were mobile, that sort of stuff. Do you see a time where the technology extends away from the doctor, away from the hospital, right to the end person?
No doubt about it. Remote diagnostics are
Hmm.
a big, big investment opportunity these days. That, in fact, some of my friends in venture capital are much more interested in investing in remote diagnostics than they are in drugs. Because pharmaceuticals are a real roll of the dice, and it
Mm.
takes years to get a pharmaceutical device on actually to patients. But diagnostic devices, things that at a distance take blood pressure, can monitor your breathing, can monitor how you move around the house. Those kind of diagnostic tools are pretty low bar for getting accepted by the FDA.
Right.
So we're going to see in the it's amazing what you can do in terms of measuring clinical data non-invasively
Mm.
using various kinds of infrared light. There's actually a proposal that actually VC is funding now for what's called a remote diagnostic booth. And it will be sort of a small room-sized booth. It could be in the pharmacy, it could be in a
Hmm.
school, it could be in a senior center. Um, and you walk into it, and all of these devices around can, take your temperature, blood pressure, um, fingertips, just the sweat. You can get a lot of information out of sweat, do a really complete physical workup. And
Mm.
then there's a big screen, of course, where the doctor shows up and talks to you and actually there's enough room so that you can do physical activities so that you can track that kind of issue if it exists. So I think we're going to, so that is being made for schools, workplaces, et cetera, because it's expensive
Yeah.
to do all of that stuff in one place. But it's ultimately going to be cheaper than having everyone, go to the doctors. And that some of that technology is going into the home. There's no doubt about it.
So what you just described, my first thought was when I go to the pharmacy, there's that chair with the little blood pressure
Right?
mechanism
Yeah.
where you just put in and you take your blood pressure right then and there.
Hmm. Right.
That would also help with, because we're all getting older, everybody is looking for more doctors, for more
Yeah.
nurses, that sort
Right.
of
Right.
stuff. So that reduces the workload on the existing doctors or the existing healthcare professionals to
Right.
try and help them move forward. Mhm.
And the
So,
other thing,
so
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
The other thing I think is going to be interesting in healthcare is AI. In terms, you know, already we're seeing AI used as a physician's assistant, for example, literally will take the notes during a patient interview.
Mhm.
And so the doctor doesn't have to sit at the computer and stare at the computer screen. The AI will take really pretty good notes, and then the doctor reviews them.
Yeah.
We're seeing apps like that. Uh, One that I'm really interested in is the notion of putting together a lot of a given patient's information, which might include in the future their genome scan,
Hmm.
their health history, uh, their occupation, all of these different aspects that make up, ultimately when you're healthy and sometimes why you're diseased. And that goes up into the cloud, anonymized, with thousands or hundreds of thousands of very similar, profiles, exactly the same data, but from different people, different ages, different backgrounds and and basically can look ahead and say, based on what we're seeing in 80-year-olds with your similar genome and habits and basic body functions, here's something you should worry about. And it's not just based on genetic information, it's actually based on true experience that is then put together. In the industrial world, it's this technology is already out there. It's called digital twins. You can actually buy a jet engine now.
Hmm.
One could if one was an airline. Um,
Or I
that
owned stock from Intel when they first started.
that's right. That's right. I'd have two jet engines by
And there
now.
you go. Yes.
But essentially, the jet engine has lots and lots of instruments that measure vibration, how long it's been flying, how fast fluids are operating, and all of that gets sent to the cloud,
Hmm.
with exactly the same engine being used in airplanes all over the world,
Of
sending the
course.
same information to the cloud,
Yeah.
which then puts it together and goes, okay, this part is going to fail sometime in the next, you know, 10 days. And literally, the jet engine can call ahead to the next airport and say, I need this part. So have the part ready to install when I land.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
literally, the pilot doesn't necessarily hear about that. So that's called the digital twin technique. And it's being used on everything from generators and wind turbines to things like jet engines. We should have digital twins and one in the cloud that we can compare to lots of people like us. So I
That
think
that
that's the
then
that
begs the
Mhm.
question for me, and I can hear somebody saying it someplace, where does the privacy controls come in? Where do the
Right.
security controls? My background for the last 25 years has been cybersecurity.
Hmm.
Um, as a result, it's been all about how do we protect information. The entire concept of privacy started arising 10 years after we started thinking in terms of cybersecurity.
Right.
What you're talking about from the digital twins, how do we control that? So, my question then to you is, what do you see happening from a cybersecurity and a privacy point of view? And I'm going to supplement that question with one of the things I've noticed over the years is that people's worries about privacy have been decreasing.
Hmm.
You and I come from a generation where we were isolated. Our information was on paper. We knew where it was. The paper was in this physical lockbox. When it went into other systems that we could not physically see, we consciously started being worried about our own privacy.
Right.
As we've grown older, I've noticed that younger generations less and less concerned about privacy. So those
Hmm.
kids that are in high school right now, they're putting stuff out on the various different social media apps that I would never have done when I was their age. And
Right.
that's because their worries about privacy have changed compared to ours.
Hmm.
So my question goes back, what do you see happening from privacy? What do you see happening from cybersecurity?
Well, I
And as it
think,
stays cybersecurity.
I think we will always need cybersecurity. I think it'll become, uh, much less of a sort of a uh, reactive sort of thing. Because right now, the white hat hackers spend a lot of their time sort of chasing down what went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've been in the field for a long time, and for a long time, big companies and even banks, if something happened to their IT systems, they actually didn't like to talk about it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only probably in the last 5 or 10 years that we started to force them in various ways to admit that they had a problem and
Mm-hmm.
begin to, so that's a good start. The first thing I always say about this is there's everyone has things they want to keep private, even if you're young. And the
Mm-hmm.
classic example of that for me was Facebook back in the days when Mark Zuckerberg basically was saying no one needs privacy. Uh, Face there was Spotify, the music streaming service, had
Mm-hmm.
started in Europe and had been very successful in Europe. And all the music lovers in the United States could hardly wait for Spotify to come to the United States. It was
Mm-hmm.
so exciting. And Zuckerberg made a deal that initially you could sign up through Facebook and sort of control Spotify through your
Right.
Facebook page. And what he didn't say was that everything that you listened to on Spotify was going to show up on your page. So all of a sudden, high school kids who swore that they never listened to anything softer than 10-inch nails, now it turned out they were, listening to show tunes at night in their bedroom. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, whoa, that's an invasion of privacy. I've never seen Facebook turn around so fast, but they
Yeah.
shut that off. So everyone has something that they
Mm-hmm.
so we're getting, I think, a lot closer. The example of digital twins, for example, will be high. We're really learning how to anonymize medical information and genetic information
Yeah.
because that's enormously important. And it's good to look at healthcare as an example of how the proper combination of technology and law can protect privacy. And that would be HIPAA, which
Mm-hmm.
is the act that, controls patient information, and pretty much has been a success. If you disclose information about a patient publicly or for any other purpose, you can get in a lot of trouble. You can go to jail. And the combination of, good technology, HIPAA has kept medical information pretty private. Ironically, it works so well now that it's getting in the way of e-medicine, of being able to,
Yeah.
immediately. I mean, about the only business I know that still uses fax machines is doctors because they fax things to the drugstore. Now that's changing quickly, but
Yeah.
part of that was HIPAA.
Yeah.
So I think that the security question won't go away. And I do think the younger generation understands better the trade-offs between letting you have less privacy, but more features that come back to you. But it will never go
Yeah.
away. And the other
Yeah. It's
good thing,
funny.
yeah, go ahead.
It's funny. You were just mentioning fax machines. I had mentioned to you just before we started the interview that I have this little museum I've collected of
Hmm.
technologies as time has gone on. As I said, I've been in the technology space since the mid 80s.
Hmm.
And I've tried to have something that shows as we go along, and it's the same sort of thing. So I like to go back to originally we were dealing with the vacuum tubes.
Hmm.
Then they created the mainframe computers that had the old tape and reels.
Right.
That got changed. They shifted that over to the big floppies. Now,
Hmm.
these were the big floppies for the mainframe computers, but then they started to have with the PCs a smaller form factor for the PCs. Fax machine was just starting to come around at that time, going away from the old ticker tapes and
Hmm.
teletypes and that sort of stuff. We went from that to where is it? To the
Right.
harder floppies.
Hmm.
And then we went from the harder floppies to the CD-ROMs.
Hmm.
And from the CD-ROMs, we went to the thumb drives, which is gone. I think one of my sons are probably using it now. And from there, we moved right to the cloud, which I have no way of representing. But
Hmm.
what you're seeing is everything's going from very slow, very big, very cumbersome. Well, you could say this is a little bigger, but it is definitely heavier. Which, by the way, this has gold on it. And one of my very first bosses used to keep these and collect these so that he could remove the gold from it. Now, if anybody ever sees these or finds these now, take it. It's worth its weight, probably in gold.
Ah.
So we're talking about some massive jumps since we
Hmm.
started these things. I can see once we get a little bit more into what was the term you used? Not the leading edge, but the
Sensible
um, uh,
adopters.
sensible adopters, starting to get a little overwhelmed because our
Mhm.
ability to think and to process these things changes. Are there any things that we should be thinking about on how to deal with it? Any strategies?
Yes, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Okay.
The first one is if one is going to, you have to stay up with sort of the latest kinds of technology that are in the workplace. If you're
Hmm.
going to even just be a consultant part of the time, you need to know, so, and right now, I think the biggest change in office software that needs to be learned is collaboration software,
Right.
things like Slack, uh,
Okay.
because those have become the fundamental underpinning of the business infrastructure, particularly now that part of the work is done remotely.
Hmm.
So understanding at least what Slack is or the similar platforms, that's something that those of us who have left the business world or not been paying attention for a while, that's the newest development that's really significant.
For those that don't know what Slack is, think of it as um, a texting application that allows large group chats to occur. And it's a very, there's a story about how they came about, but I'm not going to go into that. But it's a very useful tool for group chats from disparate
Mhm.
individuals. Anyway, continue.
And then I think the other thing is to, you know, try specifically with AI, because that's probably the big thing that we need to learn about and track and feel comfortable with. And I think one has to begin to use some of the Chat GPT or Gemini or Claude or, you know, just starting with Google and
Mhm.
Gemini, which is on most people's browsers.
Right.
We It's good to take something from one's own domain of interest and structure questions and prompts around that. And because you know about whatever this is, chemical engineering or
Hmm.
accounting, you get some sense of, the accuracy, the completeness, and so forth. And you learn about prompt engineering, which is, how do you put together and ask a question for the AI that gives you the answer that you're really interested in. And I'll use myself as an example. As a writer, I started out as a kid writing with pencil and paper, and
Hmm.
then graduated to the typewriter. And then personal computers came along, and I was an early adopter of personal computers, and I would use it for journalism all the time. My gosh, it was such an improvement. But I wouldn't use it for my creative writing because I was afraid there was some magic involved with the typewriter, right? That
Hmm.
I'd break something if I moved over. And finally, one day I began to play around, just taking things I'd already written and typing them, and nothing bad happened. So
Yeah.
interestingly enough, I still do my rough drafts by hand because there is something fundamentally different about handwriting than typing on a computer. But then I switched to the computer.
Yeah.
So AI came along, and of course, all we writers are really interested in AI for many reasons. One, the AI models are probably, you know, scraping a lot of our online content, including our books, without paying us anything. So the Authors
Hmm.
Guild is very involved in that. But the other question is, does this replace writers? How does it, what does it do to writing? Uh,
Yeah.
because, can, it doesn't, it doesn't write well, but it doesn't write badly. There's a kind of
But it's
voice you
getting
can hear.
better.
It's getting
Like
better.
I started using ChatGPT, I want to say 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And where it was then compared to where it is now, head and
Hmm.
shoulders.
Right.
2 years from now, I can see vast improvements as well coming.
Right. So with me, AI came along, and I didn't want to use AI to write for me directly. I was working on a novel, and I'd come to sort of a difficult place, and I wasn't sure what my character was going to do next. Um, and so I put together a prompt, basically asking, I was using ChatGPT then, um, to write a scene from a movie script about my character and
Hmm.
what he might do under these circumstances and how he would act. And it actually wrote a pretty good scene. And then I was able to ask it, well, what if he was asleep at the beginning of this scene? And would we
Right.
write it? And so, I actually didn't use any of what the computer wrote, but it did give me real insight into how to deal with this character. So
Yeah.
that's just my personal example, but I think people in almost any discipline can do the same thing with
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. No, I agree. But there is a worry. Okay, so one thing everybody should understand is AI right now isn't intelligence. That's
Right.
still a few years away. What it is it's combining things that are relatively close in nature to what the ask is, and then presenting information that if you were able to read 10,000 books, you'd have the
Hmm.
same information.
Right.
So it's not an intelligence, it's a regurgitation of
Hmm.
already known information.
Right. And
So,
it's done essentially by assigning numbers to
yeah,
absolutely everything, to
yep,
words, to letters, to tints, to colors.
hmm,
So as soon as it's ingested your question, it's all numbers. And all it
yep,
cares about is the numbers. It's all statistical, even though it seems kind of miraculous. I think back to, how amazing GPS was when it was opened up and consumers
yeah,
could use it. I mean,
yep,
here was this box that knew exactly where you were, just tracked along and showed you exactly what road you were on. And
hmm,
it was almost, like it was, intelligent in a way. But in fact,
yeah,
all it was doing was comparing the time difference between two radio signals.
yeah. So I think you take AI now, you add it to technology, automation, and all of a sudden you see society starting to change because a lot of the things that, to be honest, going up and down ladders now for me kind of scares me
Hmm.
Whereas if there's something that's automation that has that ability to recognize patterns, which is in essence what AI is doing right now,
Right.
looking at patterns and then acting based on the knowledge tied to those
Hmm.
patterns. Um, I think we're going to be looking at society completely changing,
Hmm.
which then begs the question, if a lot of those things go away, what replaces them? Does anything replace them?
Hmm.
And moving forward from there. And that's a conversation you and I could spend a couple of hours over on a beer.
Hmm.
Um, I'll just to finish the AI side of things. One of the things I see right now are patterns very similar to what happened in the late 90s when websites first started showing up. So
Right.
remember, the first website came out in 94.
Hmm.
Everybody jumped and their dog jumped on top of them, thinking this is the next place. But people overjumped into it. As a
Hmm.
result, at the end of the 90s, we had the dot-com bubble burst.
Right.
The patterns I see happening right now are exactly the same for AI. Websites, the internet, all of that is foundational, but it takes a longer curve than what's
Hmm.
going on right now. AI is foundational. It's just going to take longer than what everybody thinks.
Right. Um, yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. I think what in some ways, I mean, the first thing I would say is in terms of that, the early rise of websites. I remember giving speeches and having parents come up to me and say, my kid is just a whiz. He's now designing websites, for all the people who live around us. He just does these websites. Um, he wants to drop out of school and do this full time. And I would say, suppose your son was mowing everyone's lawns and
Mm,
doing such a great job at it that he was just mowing lawns constantly. Would you tell him to drop out of school so that he could develop his lawn mowing business? Because what he does now is going to be child's play in another 5 years.
yeah,
And I mean, what he was doing was simple HTML, which
yeah,
just about anyone could do. So we tend to also overestimate the value of some of these digital skills. And I think that that is really happening today. We're seeing so many human abilities the natural human abilities that we pick up as we grow up, being sort of rolled over by digital technology. Um, I worked with a Fortune 500 company recently, and the HR department head of it told me that she was now having remedial social skills classes for some of the new employees because it
mm,
appeared that they had the right diploma and the right grades, but they'd never been out of their dorm room. So I remember we talked about what that involved, but the part that scared me or freaked me out was um, she said, and then the most important thing is we teach how to start a conversation and how to know a conversation is over. So who would have thought that we would have to teach that? But it's because of the nature of the digital tools that kids grow up with. They have texting and SMS and chat GPT and WhatsApp.
yeah,
And they don't have to be face to face and that sort of momentary spontaneity that you need. If all you're going to text back is LOL, you still have a little time to think about it.
yeah.
So, so
So,
yeah, go ahead.
so if you turn that around and you look at us, that changes the dynamic of the relationships between us and our grandkids
Hmm.
because we know how to deal with these things. We know
Exactly.
how to deal with the
Hmm.
personal relationships, but we have another person that doesn't.
Right.
So what you're saying is as we get older, we have to understand that the personality of the people we're dealing with is changing, not
Hmm.
just the technology.
Right. And that we have unique and valuable skills that we learned in the analog world.
Mm,
Sometimes I think, I've heard so much talk about the digital natives, the digital generation, right?
okay. Yeah.
And they would call older people digital immigrants. Um, and it occurred to me that what we should really do is get proud about the fact that we grew up analog. I mean, we should sort of older um, Gen X and baby boomers. I think we should rename as a single generation the analog generation. We're analog and we're
I
proud of
like
it
that.
because we have this series of skills that I think will be increasingly important to pass on. And I think that, as my friend in the HR department has found, you need somebody to teach these. And I think in every aspect of business, as AI basically sucks more and more air out of the room when it comes to original human thinking, uh,
Mhm.
having people who know the domain but still have these sort of uh, analytic skills or social skills that come with growing up analog will be more and more useful.
It's interesting. Last night, my son asked me what time it was. And I looked over at the clock, which is an analog clock, and it said it's 10 to 7. And he looked at me and said, okay, what's that mean? Tell me what the time is, because he's thinking digital
Right,
6:50, not 10 to 7.
right.
So that's something we have to be aware of as we get
Hmm.
older, that the language is going to change at a
Hmm.
fundamental level as well.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, so we're getting close to an hour now with this conversation. If you were to give any advice for people about to retire or having just retired, what advice would you provide them thinking about what's coming?
Hmm. Um, well, as I said, I think that the key elements are if one is going to keep a foot in the business world, uh, get to know basic technologies. And, there's just enormous amounts of online classes for
Mhm.
learning, everything from Slack to a lot of AI also. And as I said, AI is something you have to play with yourself.
Yeah,
And I think that's both of those are important. Um, it seems to me that, I mean, what I would be interested in and what my work is becoming more about is, you know, what is the human element? How do we preserve it? What is it that, we need to teach our
mhm.
kids, or we need to let teachers know that this is skills that they have to teach. Sort of carrying on that analog tradition, because we really need to figure out what is uniquely human, and what what is uniquely human, and how do we keep it alive? So that
Yeah,
sort of informs my thinking about having a larger purpose, which I think is important after one retires or semi-retires from a very, active life. I don't know that our generation is the generation that really wants to just play golf. I think because of the way we grew up, in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s, there was a social activism, there was this excitement about change, and indeed there was change everywhere.
mm,
And, I think that's in our bones. And
yeah,
so the idea of retiring to Florida and just playing golf, now some people will think that's fine. But I think for a lot of our generation, that's just going to be too boring. So I think before retirement happens, one needs
yeah,
to have a plan, a
yeah.
mission. And honestly, Neil, I think you're a pretty good example of that.
Thank you very much. Honestly, it's really enjoyable having conversations with people like yourself that have different perspectives. And I think that entire act of having a conversation is something that I think we really have to keep on teaching
Exactly.
for people moving forward. Michael, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for having this conversation. Um, do you have another book coming out?
I'm working on one now, and it
Okay.
probably won't be out for another year and a half or so. It's taking a long time. It usually takes me a year and a half to write a book. So
Okay. Well, when it's
I'll,
done,
I'll I will
let
let
me
you
know.
know.
And then I'll have you back on and we can talk some more about that. And if you have some additional thoughts, do you let me know as well? Because I think
Sure.
this entire conversation about what's coming is
Mhm.
always really interesting. So
Right.
anyway,
Well, it just keeps changing. So perhaps we'll have a conversation before my next book.
probably. Michael, thank you very much. I much
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Have a good day, and I'll have a good night.
You got it.
Ciao.
Talk to you later.
Bye
Bye bye.
bye.